Chapter 19, Kyrael's Headsman, Capital of Aurora. Imperial Legionnaire, Godslayer. Drake's eyes snap open. He meditates on his knees in the middle of an all-but-vacant square in the dead center of Aurora's capital. In front of him stands a monument, a massive statue of the first Emperor Praxis. At Drake's back looms the space elevator of Babylon. Babel 01 stretches above the clouds, piercing the heavens. The streets are empty, indicating a curfew is in full effect throughout the city. At Drake's side, an Imperial Legionnaire approaches. Legionnaire, Godslayer, it's time. Drake takes a heavy breath and gives the Legionnaire a side glare but does not say a word. Space Elevator Platform. The space elevator shaft comprises 4 solid, flexible pillars stretching to the stratosphere. The pillars are held together by massive metal rings that are placed every 200 yards vertically. In between the pillars are walls of thick ballistic glass sheets that can fold into each other to prevent from breaking under the force of the moon's rotation. The main elevator platform is the size of the 02 Arena in London. The main platform consists of 4 smaller quarter-circular platforms that can be connected or separated at any time, depending on the size of what is being moved up or down, as well as being capable of operating simultaneously, moving supplies from the ground up into the stratosphere and down in a steady progression. Each platform works on 2 massive cogs that hinge each platform to 4 pillar walls of the enormous structure. A force field wall will generate whenever the platforms are not joined in together, creating a several-mile-tall barrier. Currently, all the plates are locked into one for a signal trip to the stratosphere of Aurora. The platform is highly decorated with Imperial colors, banners, and even red carpets with the Imperial seal. The platform seemed more decorated for a king's coronation than a mock execution. A platoon of Imperial Legionnaires was grouped in a half-circle with Inquisitor Hind standing in the middle. 2 tanks approach the stationary platoon and board the platform, followed by another platoon of Imperial Legionaries in a procession behind the tanks. Still, in an adamantine weaved straitjacket, Abaddon is brought onto the platform behind the 2 tanks, dragging him behind them. Abaddon has fastened around his neck a metal collar attached to 2 chains of which the opposite ends are welded to the muzzle brakes of the 2 escort tanks' main guns. Both tanks have their turrets reversed, pointing at Abaddon. The tank on his left has its gun set at 315 asterisk, and the tank on his right has its gun set at 225 asterisk. With all the slack pulled out of the chain, Abaddon has no choice but to move forward. Walking beside Abaddon on his flanks but out of the blast zone of the tanks are Lilith to Abaddon's left and Drake to Abaddon's right. Abaddon seems to still be in a state of mental incapacity. He is still under Lilith's hypnotic spell. Lilith is wearing the armor of an Imperial Legionnaire. Drake carries in his left hand a large metal container, 2 and 1/2 ft wide, 5 ft long, and 2 and 1/2 ft deep. The container has written on its side FPSC, Forward Projecting Super Collider. Below FPSC, the weapon's nickname, the Hammer of Creation, is written in a larger font. Drake is chained to the weapon by his wrist. Most of the chain itself is coiled up like a lasso on Drake's waist, with enough slack to grant him 54 feet of distance from the container if he desires. The escort tanks stop once Abaddon is in the center of the elevator platform. The tracks on the escort tanks magnetize to the platform. Abaddon continues to take steps forward like a zombie when Lilith stops him, yelling, "Prohibere, cease." Abaddon freezes and puts his foot back in place. Lilith, genuflect. Abaddon then gets on his knees and bows his head forward with his eyes facing the ground. The tank guns follow his head and point downwards at him. Inquisitor Hind leaves his platoon behind as he leaves the platform. He yells to Drake, "You've got this, Godslayer." Drake simply nods his head in the Knight Captain's direction. Drake then lets out a whistle, and from the platoon of Legionnaires behind him emerges his squire, a half-Nephilim 14-year-old wearing white adamantine armor like Drake. The squire approaches Drake with his hands out, carrying a great sword wrapped in the white and black flag of the Nephilim world adamant. The squire bows before Drake. Drake reaches over with his right hand and removes from the folded flag a Titan blade, Sunder, or the God Cleaver. Sundar had the same bearing as Andrew's Titan blade, except it was grander in size, with a 6.5-foot blade and a handle that was half a foot greater in length than that of Godsend. The squire stands and wads up the flag of adamant. Before he departs Drake's side, he points to the container Drake carries at his side. "Salim, what is that for?" Drake looks down at the container and then back to his squire. "This is in case his headless body wants to give us any trouble." Drake slaps the god cleaver on his back, and the sword scabbard magnetizes to his armor. Drake then holds out his right arm, and Salem wraps a phoenix medallion around his wrist. The medallion is like Andrew's but less rough, almost polished. Drake dismisses his squire, telling him to stay on the ground with Inquisitor Hind while he goes up. As Salem departs the elevator platform, Lilith yells over Abaddon to Drake. "Lilith, remember, we need him alive for the Sacrament of Fire." A royal emissary appears out of nowhere carrying a scanner that looks like a hand mirror with a screen. The emissary stands before Abaddon and points the device at him. "Drake, what are you doing?" The emissary responds but does not look up at Drake. Emissary: "No worries, Godslayer, just standard protocol before an audience with the Grand Arbiters." The emissary scans Abaddon up and down with the device. Confused, he knocks on the screen. The emissary thought out loud, "What's happening here?" The screen on the device turns blue and then shorts out. "Emissary, what the hell?" He quickly throws down the device, smashing it. He then yells, "Bring me another one. This one is busted." A legionnaire runs to the royal emissary's side and hands over another scanner. Simultaneously, another soldier was cleaning up the mess the emissary made. The emissary points the new device at Abaddon, and immediately it sorts out like the last one. In a huff of rage, the emissary throws this one down too. "No matter, he is here, but to meet his end. Drake, he won't move a muscle unless she says." The emissary sighs in frustration. "Let this thing move already." The emissary lifts his hand and snaps his fingers. The gears on the elevator platform start to wind up as the elevator lifts off. Drake looks to the sky as the elevator platform zips to the heavens. A red glint flashes from Drake's pupils as if there is literal fire in his eyes. Chapter 20. Pillar of Fire. Trajan's Office. All the lights are off in Trajan's office, even though it's midday. The only light source comes in through the bay windows of the office. Trajan stands behind his chair, his left hand resting on the furniture piece and his head pointed down. The purple spheres of light were gone, and his helm seemed cold, as if his eyes were closed, and he was in deep thought. Yavich walks up and stands beside Trajan. They communicate telepathically. "Yavich, you needed me?" Suddenly, the eye slits on Trajan's helm light up. He turns his head towards Yavich and then pivots his head up, peering through the bay windows towards the sky. "Trajan, it's been a long time since I've had a notion of fear, but something isn't right. I feel as if a great tragedy will soon fall upon us." Space elevator platform, Exosphere. Now safely above Aurora's anomaly, an Imperial frigate carrying the Imperial Magisterium approaches from above, with an Imperial battle fleet in tow. Over the planet's horizon, scattered across the moon's exosphere, is the Aurorian Reserve Fleet, primarily old, mothballed Imperial destroyers, along with countless military satellite installations that operate as orbital fortresses, each individually capable of dispensing a small army. The elevator platform halts at the top of the elevator shaft. A female voice comes over the intercom. "Airlock disengaged." The elevator's roof opens into space, but those standing on the elevator platform are not met with decompression or the vacuum of space. Instead, a pungent ghost light field maintains an artificial biome on the uppermost layer of the structure. The platform rises as the Imperial frigate descends. The platform reaches its uppermost level. It was as if the passengers on the platform were standing on a pillar in space, with no walls or roof above them, just the vast open void, a peculiar sight, to say the least. The Imperial frigate stops, floating catty-corner in suspension above the platform, looming menacingly over those below. 3 shuttles detach from the frigate and land on the platform. Everyone on the platform stands at attention, except for Abaddon, who is still mentally lobotomized. The 3 shuttles open, and the two at the flanks of the center shuttle release each a platoon of Legionnaires. 3 Imperial Arbiters emerge from the center shuttle wearing red gowns and white adamantine full helms adorned with gold trim. The Arbiters do not walk or even move. They hover forward silently with their feet off the ground and their red gowns dragging behind them for 20 feet. Behind the robed individuals is an escort of 4 Imperial Knights, each heavily armed and standing over 7 feet tall. From behind the Knights emerges a Legionnaire in peculiar tech armor. He wears a holographic screen on his forearm and is orbited by tiny flying sphere cameras. The Legionnaire makes haste as he controls the cameras from the holoscreen on his arm, acting as a one-man camera crew. The 3 Arbiters halt before Abaddon, hovering ominously over him. They sit in suspension between the escort tanks with 2 Imperial Knights at each side. One of the Arbiters removes his helm, revealing he is but a young man. Young Imperial Arbiter, look at me. I want to see the eyes of the man who killed my father. Lilith, he cannot respond to you, the young Arbiter. Then make him look at me. Drake, I would advise against that, Your Majesty. The young Arbiter glares at Drake. Young Arbiter, I wasn't asking you. Drake grits his teeth. The helmless Arbiter looks back to Lilith and commands, do as I say. Lilith speaks Latin and orders Abaddon to look at the young Imperial Arbiter. Abaddon peers up robotically, facing the Imperial Arbiters, revealing his red eyes. The helmless Arbiter. There it is. It would be best if you were the last of your kind. What a historic day this will be. Without a hint of spirit or expression in his voice or face, Abaddon interjects, you have brought me an army. Abaddon's sudden outburst takes everyone aback. Lilith yells in Latin, ordering Abaddon like a dog to lower his head. Abaddon follows her words and does as she commands, moving his head back into a position to be removed. Imperial Arbiter to Lilith. I'm not done, Drake butts in. It's best if we don't meander. Glaring down from a place of safe elevation, the young Arbiter roars, silence, freak. If I wanted the opinion of Kyrael's albino lapdog, I would ask. The 2 Imperial Arbiters at the young Arbiter's flanks slowly turn their heads towards the newly appointed Arbiter. Following these gestures, they drift away, creating distance from the young Arbiter. Drake sits the FPSC case beside him and magnetizes it to the floor. Drake loops the chain at his side to his arm until it's the perfect length and jumps upward. His gentle hop rocketed him into the air. The chain at his side unravels quickly and pops once all the slack has been exhausted, snapping Drake around where he's upside down to the Arbiter. The platform and the blue oceans of Aurora are now above Drake's head, and the void of space is at his feet. Drake broke past the artificial gravity and is now held in suspension above the platform and now eye to eye with the young Arbiter. Everyone in the procession is at a pause. Lilith, the emissary, and all legionaries stare up with beady eyes in silence. Drake's glare pierces through the Arbiter. Drake leans forward and whispers, I see your father hadn't taught you enough about me when he was alive. You seem the daring type when you were above me. Perhaps we could see if you can truly fly. Drake looks up at the shimmering atmosphere of Aurora, then back down, locking eyes with the Arbiter. Arbiter, and you dare lay a hand on a Grand Arbiter? Drake, I could hurl you into the stratosphere, and no one in the Atlas system would dare lift a finger in objection. All 180 billion would watch as you flail and burn off into nothing. The young and arrogant newly appointed Arbiter looks down at his knights, but they are looking away to silently say he is on his own in this matter. The young Arbiter looks down and puts his helm back on in silence. Young Imperial Arbiters speak in a quiet and quivering tone. Let's begin. Drake tugs on the chain, tethering him to the platform. The momentum sends him down back the artificial gravity of the platform. His metal boots thud against the platform when he lands flat on both his feet like a cat. Drake grabs the pommel of the Titan blade, Sunder, on his back. One of the more professional Arbiters looks down at Drake and states, that won't be necessary. This Arbiter was an old man. It can be understood by his voice. Following the Arbiter's remarks, a Legionnaire approaches Drake with an executioner's axe. Drake takes the axe in both hands, stands at the ready, and looks back at the Imperial Arbiters. Old Arbiter, best we do not take any risk for the sake of the light. Everyone is standing in place, ready for the grotesque event to commence. The cameraman signals that they are now live on air. The third arbiter, which has remained silent thus far, carries out the sentencing. His voice can infer that he is of middle age. Third arbiter. Today we lay to rest the remnants of a bygone age when man worshipped our oppressors, an era fueled by dogma, superstition, and fear. We know that there is no divinity, for if the royal pantheon were gods, they would not bleed, they would not die, but they all have, and all will. Drake whispers to himself, "They don't bleed, arbiter." And so the shackles of humanity has been lifted, and today we affirm our position as the rulers of our fate and the gods of our own being. Let this stand as a testament that a celestial tyranny will never again rule us. Drake tilts his head as he hears voices chanting. He looks around but cannot make heads or tails as to why no one else hears it. Drake looks down at Abaddon and sees Abaddon's lips moving, but it is as if no breath is escaping his mouth. Drake matches Abaddon's lips with the chants in his head, although it wasn't Abaddon's voice Drake was hearing, but the voices of several people, young and old, male and female. The chant sounds gibberish. Drake cannot determine whether he is hallucinating or if what he hears is genuinely transpiring, for no one else is reacting. Drake's eyes begin to pace around frantically. Third arbiter, I hereby sentence Abaddon Ladam, the last of his name, to death. The young arbiter covers what would be the mouth of his helm, the middle-aged arbiter covers his eyes, and the old arbiter covers his ears. Drake looks to the arbiters, then back at Abaddon. He continues to hear the chanting, but Abaddon's lips are no longer moving. Drake brings the axe high above his head when Abaddon looks up at him, seeming to have broken Lilith's spell. Abaddon's eyes were like molten magma, and a blazing halo erupted above his head. Abaddon, in a voice that rings out so violently and loud it rattles the space elevator platform. Abaddon, the dead will rise, and so will come my army of flies. Drake violently brings down the axe, but is not quick enough to beat the super-enriched uranium-235 colliding inside Abaddon's gut. The nuclear bomb Abaddon had smuggled in his stomach goes off. In a split second, the platform and the surrounding fleet are consumed in a 6-mile-wide ball of light that does not cease to expand as it knocks all the nearby reserve fleet out of the exosphere, hurling the military vessels downward into the anomaly and towards Aurora's surface. It was like a meteor shower, except there were no meteors. It was raining down aircraft carrier-sized vessels. A cataclysmic event of apocalyptic proportions begins to unfold. Act 2, Chapter 21. Caelum et Terram, Heaven and Earth. Andrew and Sarah follow a winding river through a dense forest. The sky is nearly blotted out by the tree canopies overhead. The wind lance gently breezes through, hovering only a foot above the river as it scoots, displacing the water beneath it. As they make their way toward a basin at the end of the waterway, they come across an ancient, Mayan-like pyramid covered in undergrowth and halfway buried by the passing of the ages. Made by a lesser-developed civilization, unlike the precursor observatory they had stumbled across years ago. Sarah, who do you think built this? Andrew brings the wind lance to a still hover over the water and gazes at the structure for a few seconds. Andrew, the Yahi, before they were the Yahi, or one of the other lost tribes. Yato told me a story. A long time ago, our people used to observe dots of light in the night sky. We used them for guidance and to predict the coming weather until a visitor from above told them to build such grand structures and to prepare. For soon a day will come that the stars will fall from the heavens and the ground will be consumed by fire. After completing this task, our ancestors awoke one morning to see one of these lights from heaven falling to the earth. They knew what this foretold. Those who could make it in time sought refuge within these grand structures, sealing shut stone doors behind them. They waited until the voice of the Great Spirit told them it was safe to return to the surface. Once the stone doors were opened, they witnessed a world in ruin, and all the dots of light in the night sky were no more. Their civilization fractured, and several tribes set off in several directions. The tribe that settled in the islands of Odysseia became the Yahi, the only ones to survive the next calamity, the scourge of Praxis. Andrew and Sarah push out into the basin riding the wind lance. The basin has 3 enormous waterfalls flowing into it. Andrew, where do we go now? Sarah smirks. Do you trust me? Andrew, yes. Sarah, trade seats with me. Andrew, how? Sarah, I'll leapfrog over you. Andrew, what? Okay, I guess. Sarah climbs over Andrew as he scoots himself back. Sarah took the reins of the wind lance and throttled it toward the easternmost waterfall at the bottom of a mountain pass. Andrew, what are you doing? Before he can finish, they pass through the water, revealing a vast and long-stretching cavern on the other side, lit by lamps of blue ghost light stretching down a tunnel. At the end of the tunnel was a glimmer of light. This had to be the other side of the mountain they were currently under. Sarah looks back at Andrew and giggles, for the waterfall has drenched both. Sarah, not much further to go. Andrew smiles, but then his look of joy drops from his face and turns into a look of concern. Andrew, did you hear that? Sarah, hear what? All I hear is the waterfall. Andrew, I just thought I heard something. I guess it was nothing. They continue down the tunnel on the wind lance. Chapter 22. Return of the Locust, Military Morgue. A corpse man and his assistant strut down a 3-story mausoleum-like interior, taking inventory of soldiers who had died off-world and had been brought back to be buried on Aurora. Corpse man looks down at his noteboard. Things on Italia must be worse than what the ROF is leading on. Both men stop and look to the ceiling when they hear a loud bang, like a massive roar of thunder that shakes the building. The corpse man turns to his assistant. Look outside and see what's going on. The assistant bolts for the nearest door and exits the building. The corpse man looks down at his noteboard when he hears something shuffling around in the body cabinet beside him. His eyes widen and the hair stands on his neck. The noise stops. The corpse man causally brings his ear closer to the shelf. He hears nothing. He perks back up. I guess I'm losing my damn The corpse man is interrupted by banging and screeching yells all around him. Doors on the body cabinets lining the walls begin to rattle as if rabid animals were trapped inside trying to escape. The corpse man drops his notebook and runs for the nearest exit. Chapter 23. Fall from Grace. Drake's eyes start to peer open. He is sprawled out and embedded half a foot deep into one of the cogs that once supported the elevator platform. While scorched, the platform is still in one piece but has been dislodged and is in free fall down the space elevator shaft. All that remained on the platform was Drake, the 2 escort tanks, and a flaming skeleton in a white adamantine weaved straitjacket. The ground had the silhouettes of everyone else who had been vaporized imprinted on the floor. The 2 tanks had been pushed back and crumpled, but were mostly intact while still magnetized to the platform. The metal collar around Abaddon's neck was vaporized, freeing him from the 2 tanks, but he was now but a burning skeleton laid over, unresponsive, with his skull pressed into the floor. Drake peers up while still embedded in the metal cog and sees the FPSC container beating against the elevator shaft walls while still tethered to his hip by an adamantine chain. Drake breaks free from the broken support cog. Using the chain attached to him, he yanks down the FPSC container, slamming it towards Abaddon. Abaddon is nearly reanimated as his face regains its features and his skin heals back, spewing embers. Drake reaches the container and begins to press in numbers on its keypad when he notices Abaddon lean up, and a blazing halo forms above his head, indicating the monster has regained consciousness. Drake stops what he is doing without hesitating, loops the chain, and lassos it around Abaddon's neck. Drake brings his arms out, tightening the chain with the intent to decapitate Abaddon. Abaddon is still in a straitjacket, unable to do anything as the chain tightens around his neck. Abaddon closes his eyes and begins to chant under his breath in a gasping manner. Drake can hear clambering around inside both the 2 wrecked tanks. Suddenly, both the main guns of the tanks turned on him. One tank fires a 180mm projectile at Drake. He can quickly dip out of the way, avoiding the projectile's trajectory. Although Drake could dodge the massive bullet, his armament was not so lucky. The passing round strikes the pommel of his Titan blade and rips it from his back, sending it through the outer walls of the elevator shaft. The Titan blade disappears over the horizon like a shooting star. The second tank gun follows up on the first as it erupts like dragon breath. Unfortunately for Drake, he had leaned right into the path of the second projectile while dodging the first. Unable to get out of the way of the howitzer projectile in time, Drake catches the massive bullet like a football, cupping his hands around the timing gear on the tip of the projectile, keeping it from detonating. The tip of the round was only an inch away from the center of his chest. This rips Drake off his feet and sends him flying like a bullet through the ballistic glass walls of the space elevator with the FPSC crate and Abaddon in tow. After being tossed from the space elevator shaft, Abaddon's neck slips out of Drake's chain noose. Drake and Abaddon still happen to be miles up and in free fall. As far as the eye can see, ROF vessels are plummeting all around them at terminal velocity. Drake tosses the tank round he caught like a football back at Abaddon, where the change in air pressure causes the tank round to go off only a few feet away from Abaddon, like an airburst artillery shell. As he tumbles through the air, Drake reels in the FPSC crate by its chain. Once the box is within Drake's grasp, he quickly types in a code to unlock the container. Abaddon is flailing in the wind, still in a straitjacket, unable to stabilize himself. After typing in the passcode, the crate opens and Drake removes a massive hexagon-barreled gun riddled with wires and protruding gadgets, like a crude prototype, like the first A-bomb. The weapon was gargantuan, with a 10-inch by 10-inch wide and 4-foot-in-length barrel. Drake kicks the crate into Abaddon, causing him to spin and flail violently. Drake fights the wind while at terminal velocity, zeroing his sights on Abaddon. Drake pulls the trigger. The barrel of the FPSC glows red, and light begins to shimmer around the barrel as a force field forms around it to funnel the blast's energy forward. The gun goes off, consuming everything in a blinding light like an atomic flash.